but we'd like to get started, so we have the full hour for conversation. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to talk about what's next for Invention Education. My name is Erin Toshin, and I'm the Network Director for InventEd, which is a national network of educators, researchers, funders, nonprofits, and others who are building the field of invention education. InventEd acts as a coalition of committed invention educators who connect and learn from each other to strengthen programmatic outcomes, collaborate on projects, and amplify invention education's value at the national level. Our website is posted in the chat if you would like to learn more about this community of invention educators. We are also featured in the expo. So we are thrilled to be partnering with the Chicago Student Invention Convention to co-host this educator discussion panel today. It's been a really fun and inspiring day, and we're looking forward to the next hour with all of you. So, like I said, we have an hour for this panel. It'll be about 40 minutes for discussion and about 10 to 12 minutes for question and answer. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and we'll collect those and address them during the Q&A. So jumping right in, our moderator today is Christine Lawler-King. Christine is the Executive Director of the Connecticut Invention Convention. She is also the Invention Education Programming Manager for Lemelson MIT and Invention Convention Worldwide Program Manager for the Henry Ford Museum. For 15 years, she has trained educators on incorporating invention education into their curriculum. Her passion for STEAM started with her work as a microbiologist and continued through her award-winning Connecticut STEAM program, where she was named the first district-wide STEAM coach and most recently the winner of the STEM Connector Community Trailblazer Award. Christine, thank you so much for being here and for bringing your deep insight into this discussion. I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. Can I carry you around with me so I can have that introduction whenever I'm feeling exhausted?
Yes, absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone who is joining us. And we wish we could see your faces, but we know you're out there, and we know that Saturday time is so precious, and we just really appreciate you spending your Saturday time with us. And by us, I mean this rock star panel of invention educators. We have leaders in the industry, we have administrators, we have STEM coaches, we have educators here. So these people have the street cred to be able to talk about invention education and hopefully give you some new insight and some advice and be able to help all of us give this gift of invention education to our students. So let me start with a brief introduction of this panel, and then we'll start asking some questions. So let me start with David Consalvi. He is the STEAM coordinator and teacher in South Carolina's Saluda Trail Middle School and South Point High School. David, hi, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Oh, it's great. I mean, it's an honor to be here with, been poking my head in all morning into the different inventions. And I mean, it's an awesome, some of the inventors that are walking around today or tuning in today, I guess. It's just amazing how things are going. And, it's great to be part of this panel.
Great. Thank you so much. Next is Clara Maborne. She is a biology teacher and Lemelson MIT Invent Team Advisor in Florida at Northeast High School. Hi, Clara. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you all for being here and watching this. And I'm definitely excited to hear and be a part of the discussion that we're going to be having today.
Awesome. We're so excited. I can't wait to ask you questions from a student's perspective too. Clara was an invention education student back in the day. So you've got both those angles that you can shed some light for us on. Darcy Carlson. Hi, Darcy. Darcy is the Director of Education Consultants with Britannica Digital Learning. Prior to that, she was in the classroom, a special education teacher. Thank you so much for joining us, Darcy.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this panel and hear from everybody. And thanks everybody for watching us today.
Great. I can't wait to hear more about Britannica Learning's resources and how helpful they are to invention education. And I'm new to them, so I'm going to be taking some notes. Next, we have Bree Livingood. She is the principal of New Covenant School in Massachusetts. Hi, Bree. Hello.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here today. It's great to see all the awesome learning that's been going on this year and the different judging panels and things like that. And I was so encouraged already by one of the teachers, I mentioned this a minute ago, who just was so intentional even in commenting on her students and seeing them even in this virtual platform. So super excited to hear your thoughts and questions and encourage people in this hour.
Great. And last but certainly not least, from California, it's early in the morning. Well, it's morning time there. We have Srinivasan, and she is the Executive Director for the Association of Sustainability Education. Hello, Sri. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are. I'm very excited to be here to both share and learn with you on what's next for Invention education.
Awesome. So great, thank you. So let's get into it. And please, audience, if something resonates with you, drop that in the chat for us. If you have questions about something, drop that in the chat. We will be answering some of your questions towards the end of the session. So let's get into this. Again, we have this wonderful panel, and I certainly know much about your background, but our audience doesn't. So I think my first question, and we'll start with you, David, since we started with you with the introductions, is what brings you here today? What is your Invention education background and experiences? And what do you hope to be able to tell people about Invention education?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, as a STEAM coordinator, I get to work now with teachers in several schools in our district, and that also has me working with students. And I've been in education now for 19 years. I came to it not through the traditional pathway. I was in other, and then decided education is the place for me. And since I got in there, it's always just been make education. I mean, that's why we're in this. They're what's great about it. And whatever is out there, they have so many amazing ideas. And so it's really always been for me about how do we tap into those ideas. And that's where we can make a difference in education, because that's their interest. They're bringing that to you. And so if I can tie that into my content, and so as a science educator and as a technology educator, that was what I brought into my classroom. And then now as a STEAM coordinator, I can support teachers in building the curriculum around that and finding ways to engage the students from where their ideas are. And I've always said that half the world's problems would be solved if we could just listen to all these great minds. They're just geniuses waiting to be tapped into. And they may not have all the details. That's where we as the adults can, find the fine details. But if we listen to the students for those initial ideas, it really just can drive so much change and so much value for our communities. And so I think, to me, that's the big thing. And what I guess I bring to this is my experience in both the classroom and in some of the leadership roles for having some of the discussions that really can move this to support teachers to make innovation functional within their classroom, because they've got so many other pressures. How can they function within all of that? And so it really just drives some of the discussion around that.
Great. Thank you so much. You hit on something so powerful. These kids are solving problems we're not even thinking about as adults. Mm-hmm. And they have solutions that we can't come up with because we're so either jaded or bitter or busy or we're not as creative. We need to be listening to these young inventors. They have solutions that we are not even tapping into. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, there was a movie when I was a kid. I can't tell you what it is now, but they talk about the kid who rides his bike along the top of a fence post, and he doesn't know that gravity's pulling on him. He just does it. One day he goes to school, learns about gravity, and now he can't do it anymore. So it's how do we not, we want to teach those concepts, but how do we do it in a way that doesn't eliminate that spirit and that creativity of our students? So
yep.
Yeah, it's
awesome.
Great.
Awesome. Clara, same question to you. What brings you here? What have your Invention education experiences been?
First and foremost, I just want to say my inspiration bucket is filling up right now already. And I don't think it's been 10 minutes yet. So as Christine mentioned, I was a student of Invention education when I was in high school. I was a student on a Lemelson MIT Invent teams that my school had. We invented a portable, transportable water filtration system that was modeled for the disaster victims, and it was created because of the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. And I'm Haitian, so that project really hit home for me to think about my potential family members in Haiti who could use something like that, and then all of the people around the world who may be having issues with access to clean drinking water. So after I graduated from high school, I went off to college, and then I graduated, and then I started teaching at the high school that I attended. So some of the teachers that I had were now my colleagues, and it's strange, but also very exciting to be able to lean on their expertise. But I knew right away, because of my experience with Invention education as a student, that I wouldn't enter the field of education through the traditional route. And so from not day one, because day one I was way too nervous to try anything, but definitely as I got more comfortable with the classroom management and content part, I knew I wanted to hit the ground running with Invention education and applying innovation and invention in my classroom. And for the first few years, I taught biology. And I also run an after-school STEM program. But in 2017, I started my own Invent team, and my students were just issued a patent for their invention in January, so that was really cool. They invented it's called the mosquito agitator, and it prevents mosquitoes from breeding in stagnant water using mechanical processes. So people who are concerned about other wildlife in the water don't have to be worried about chemicals affecting the other animals. And then from there, that group inspired another group of students to invent as well. So we had a Samsung Solve for Tomorrow team that we were state winners, and their project had to do with educating young diabetics by gamifying the learning process. So what I hope to share with you all is some of my ideas or experience from both sides. So what it's like to be a student receiving this kind of pedagogy, and then what it is like as an educator creating this kind of environment for students.
Great, thank you. And you touched on something that Invention education does so naturally. Invention education brings in cultures. You don't need to have a separate lesson plan and go back to the curriculum and insert lessons on culture. When you do Invention education and students are exploring their own lives and the lives of their family and the lives of their homelands and hometowns, culture is a part of this. So I appreciate you bringing that into this, because it is so important, and it is a strategy that's so powerful to including different cultures and empathy in the classroom. So thank you for mentioning that. Darcy, we would love to hear about your experiences with Invention education and how Britannica Learning resources can help us.
Yeah, so I've been involved with the Chicago Student Invention Convention for 2 years now. And what we've been doing is sharing the resources of Britannica School, which is our online encyclopedia, as well as Lumi Labs, which is our video creation and storytelling platform, so that we can allow for students to dig into the research component of it at the very beginning, understanding and discovering some of those needs that they might have or they might be uncovering. And then on the other end of things, being able to amplify student voice and be able to utilize the video form, which I think some of you may have already seen already, or at least the student videos, to allow them to share in different ways, giving them a space where they can share their ideas globally. And that's really important to us at Britannica, to be able to, a lot of our professional learning that we're providing to the educators that were involved with the Chicago Student Invention Convention, as well as what we focus our work on is driving student-led instruction, driving research and inquiry, and then taking that and taking their findings and being able to share that via, a video platform, however they choose to do that.
Great, and we'll touch upon that again with a few of the questions that, because it's just so helpful when the teacher doesn't have to be the end-all be-all expert in the room, and I think Britannica helps a little bit with that, especially on the research side. Miss Bree, how are you? And you have to tell us about your Invention education experiences, because I love when you talk about being in an Invention education professional development with a certain person and going, what is this? So please tell us how you got here.
Oh, Christine, you're one of my favorites. And also, I just have to give a quick shout out to Miss Chilton, who just was chatting on the sidebar there. She's one of my favorite educators from Tucson, Arizona. So I'm so glad that she's here. Hi, Miss Chilton. So happy to see you. Yeah, this is such an honor for me to be speaking with all of these wonderful people and to be here today, because when I first started with Invention education, I got to do an amazing PD. And the first day I thought, no way, this is not for me at all. I am a trained historian. I am in love with the old world, not the new world. And Christine can attest to the fact that as I stood there or sat there listening to all these things, I was just sort of overwhelmed. And then my kids were in the background and they started using some of the skills and the different hands-on activities and creating things with like Legos or toothpicks and paper. And I was like, oh, maybe there's something more to this than just my little fears, right, that I might have listening to these ideas. And watching my kids, my own kids learn, then it became really a passion for me to see our whole school in Arlington, Massachusetts adopt this year and go for it. So we had our whole school do an Invention convention this year and ended up having multiple kids go on to the state Invention convention, and then had even 3 students from our small little school to go on to the national convention in a couple weeks. And they're like the coolest inventions that these kids created. One is a 7-year-old, and she's just the joy that I see in my students and the encouragement that I was able to give my teachers too, to just try, just take a risk. You might make a mistake. You're going to make a mistake. Invention education's not safe necessarily, but you have someone who's like super inspiring, like Clara, with a patent, just to hear her story, David and all his work, Shuri and what you're doing too, Darcy, awesome that Britannica's coming along. Like, this is a community of people who want to see things grow and move forward. And so I'm so thankful to be here. And just, again, that inspiration bucket, Clara, great term.
I wrote that down.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I take notes. And inspiration bucket is my new term. Don't don't trademark it yet. Thank you, Bree. And Shri, please tell us, I love your story because you were told no by a school district. And I have a feeling you don't take no lightly because you went back and you got what you wanted. So please talk to us about how you got here. What are your Invention education experiences?
So I have a background in biochemistry, and I call it my theoretical background because I pivoted to science education way back when, and in my before Invention education came along, NGSS had just come out, and I was creating a curriculum based on NSF support, and so I was looking for something like Invention education. Like, there's all these beautiful trifold level approach to science, where for the first time I was able to think about how do you build creative science explorations, which is open-ended, and Google led me to Invention education, and I thought, great, I'm an educator, I'm a parent, I'm going to bring this to my district, and I championed for it, and I went along, found some resources to get teachers trained, and sent a bucket of teachers feeding the district and the principal, and they came back and they said, awesome idea, but we don't have the time for it. And those resources sat in our basement, guilt-tripping me day in and day out. And 2019 November, when so I live in California, and just to paint the picture here, we live in Bay Area, but our district had a $47.3 million budget deficit that year. So just to give you the contrast of innovation in the industry and innovation in education where I live, I looked at those folders and I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. If we're not going to do it, let me do it. And so I wrote to a principal and I said, could you give me 10 students and about an hour and a half with these students every week? And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to train them on 4 tracks, environmental sustainability, and I'll come back to this in just a bit. Why? Invention and innovation, cutting edge STEM topics, and entrepreneurship, because they all kind of go hand in hand. If you are an innovator, you need to know to talk and have those entrepreneurship skills and understand your local environment. And my other background is also in environmental in education and sustainability. So that is why I was able to bring that piece in. And so these two, we met, and like the timing was 2020, end of January, when we started the program. And we all know what happened after that. So we went on Zoom, like in probably 3 or 4 classes, but we went through the program and we went to the California Invention Convention, and our students won. And they created, you could see it on our website, you would see a bamboo scooter and a zero electricity small clothes dryer. So you'd see all that on our website. And then we wanted to, the principal was super supportive and said, let's do this school-wide next year. We're going to open up in fall, and that didn't happen. So we did the small cohort fashion again, and we did 2 things. We did a small cohort where the kids got trained on the program, but also for the entire school, we offered STEAM in action sessions. So we brought the industry folks, and they would talk about whether it's the Marine Mammal Center talking about seal sustenance and what's happening with marine life, or the last one we had Sonoma Clean Power come and talk about what is clean power and what can consumers do. It was always with the idea of, here's some knowledge, here's a challenge, and students could apply into either a design challenge or an innovation challenge and turn in their results. So these were events. So we did the events and we did the program, and again, we are sending students to the National Invention Convention, and I'm so happy about that. And it's sometimes, somebody asked me this the other day on social media, how do we do it if our school is not doing it? I said, write to the PTA, talk to the principal, talk to a teacher. Sometimes it's not a foot in the door, it may be a toe in the door. And then you can slowly sneak in, candle in the tent.
Here's another one I'm writing down. Sometimes it's a toe in the door.
Yeah, and you just do it. And the families and the kids, I hear this always. This is the best thing that happened to us this year. This is the best event. And we do a Shark Tank at the end of our program, and we have uncles and aunties and grandpas. And an advantage with the Zoom world is they're joining from everywhere, and they're seeing, and that's that happiness and that empowerment is what it's all about. Students feeling empowered about, wait, I did this, I invented this, I solved this problem, and that's the best thing about this whole journey for us.
Yep. Yeah, that end goal, that they have something tangible that they can then present to real world audiences and build confidence. And there's the expert. Like when I was peeking in on the kids in the Invention Convention here, some of the stuff I didn't know, they were teaching me. And that's so empowering to our youth to be in control of their own learning, and then to be able to give that to adults. And what I want to do now is, obviously we are all just in love with invention education, but we've got to keep it real for the audience, especially for our new to invention education educators. And not every day is kitten and rainbows. When you are trying to implement a new program, especially invention education, where it's so interdisciplinary and it brings out that historian in science, and it brings out, Clara loves science and art. I remember us talking about that. So it brings art into science. So not to bring down the mood or anything, but we're just keeping it real. I want to talk about the obstacles, the barriers to invention education. And David, I want to start with you, because I remember you saying to me, your job as the STEM coordinator is to reduce those barriers. And I want to hear what barriers have come up for you and your educators, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, it's one of those, this is such a awesome thing that it's very hard to find someone who doesn't say, oh, this is great, I want to do it. It's very difficult, though, to find people that find it easy to implement. And so, Bree, I applaud you, we need our administrators to be like you. We ask teachers to do this all the time, to, have that growth mindset and embrace the fear. But sometimes the administrators need to remember that they need to do the same, and it's scary for everybody, and embrace that. So it really is finding a way to mainstream that innovation education so that it becomes part of the instructional practice and not seen as something separate. So it's not a separate element. And so I think a lot of the stories, Clara and Sri, they've talked about how the learning is embedded in. It's not, we're doing this as something on the side, and then we're going to learn on Tuesdays, but we'll do this on Wednesdays. It's part of that. And then I think the other thing is thinking about the competencies. And I believe in the chat, they'll put up a link to what South Carolina uses as our competencies. And they give a way for teachers to look at the skills that go across all content areas. And they're the skills that students need. And so there's things like how to do an investigation, how to design a solution, and how to just share an idea. We think about that as adults and say, oh, that's not really that complicated. But there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of levels to it, and there's levels to do it well. And so when we think about giving the tools to teacher, not to say, here's what we want all our students to do, but how can we give them the tools to be able to put it into their lessons? And so when someone says, well, what are you teaching your kids? Then now they have this evidence, and they can feel confident that their students are growing, because parents want to see that their children are growing in the classroom. And so this gives them that opportunity to basically do that. And so for me, helping overcome the barriers is giving teachers tools that allow them to showcase the learning in a variety of ways, and really also to kind of keep after the administrators and say, look, this is a growth process. It's not, and sometimes the best part about it and the most learning is going to come from the most beautiful failure. They are going to look horrendous, and it's not always the pretty poster, but it's the clump in the corner, that you don't know what to do anything with, but that you talk to the students. And I mean, it's phenomenal. So it really, it comes to the growth that the students have.
That's great. So again, so important for people to, hear, yes, there are barriers, but there are people and groups of people who are helping each other to get across those. Clara, do you have any thoughts on barriers and challenges that you faced, and then advice on how to get over them?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with everything David said. I'm going to coin another term, the invention mindset, right? So it's a amalgamation of growth mindset, social emotional learning, all of the STEM ideas, and then comes this part of creativity and taking risks. And that's to me, that's the invention mindset. But one of the barriers that I see is it's an access barrier, I think, for a lot of students. Sometimes these novel programs become niche programs that certain students get to experience. And this is something, like David was saying, it needs to go across all curriculum. All teachers need to be able to pull from that toolbox and use in their classrooms, whether it's biology, history, English, entrepreneurship classes, even gym. Like I have a student who couldn't get into an auditorium, although we had a ramp. Her wheelchair it didn't work. But we can totally have students inventing. But I just want to make sure that we're doing so in a way where we're giving all students this opportunity, whether it's from all socioeconomic backgrounds, all ability types, age, right? I think Bree said somebody was 7 years old inventing that is amazing. And and all of this creativity, all of these things happening, there's no limit really, but there are barriers such as niche sectors or only applying these ideas to certain courses. And something that I'm trying to do is to open up Invention education during the school day, because another barrier is I have students who work after school, or they have to take care of their siblings, or they have other things going on, and I want them to be able to still access that space of Invention education in that allotted time that we have, that dedicated time, and opening it up outside of an honors class or an AP class, so that students who may not be performing well academically for whatever reason can still have the experience of Invention education. Because a student who's not great at math right now could invent, I don't know, the next great mathematical equation or technology, given the opportunity to explore the idea of math outside of that box of the classroom or the homework paper. Yeah, and it's something I'm working on. I think I heard that it is a changing process and it needs to continuously be working. Invention itself is an iterative process, but so is applying Invention education. That's an iterative process as well.
Love it. You hit on so many good topics there about inclusion and access. And, you know, when you say, hey, who wants to join a STEM program? Your future scientists and mathematicians are like, yeah, me. Those are, we want those kids, but we want the kids that don't raise their hands, because they don't know that they're scientists and engineers and mathematicians yet. But once you get them into Invention, then the scientist comes out in them, that engineer comes out, and they would never know that if they were sitting in their classroom, reading their textbooks, doing potentially like cookie cutter labs. And Invention just opens so many doors and opens so many eyes that may not have been on that before. Bree, having been new to Invention education and having brought this to your teachers, talk to us about the barriers that you faced at your schools and the challenges. And again, as David said, it's so important that administrators are in on this conversation, because, you know, as Shri said, we need a toe in the door. Sometimes you need multiple toes. You need teachers, administrators, parents, PTA. So talk to me about how that just went for you with your teachers.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I was just jotting down some notes here, thinking about what David and Clara were sharing. And the one thing, the word that kept sort of coming back in my mind was a mutual trust built in a school community between parents, teachers, administrators, and being able to say, hey, and teacher and student, right? The teacher saying to the students, I trust that you can do this. I'm going to stand back just a little bit and let you invent something and let you go through the process. I'll be right here by your side to help encourage you, help you think and ask questions, but I trust that you can do it. Having the administrator say to the teacher, hey, I trust that you can do this. I'm going to be right by your side. I was beyond fortunate as an administrator to have the support of you, Christine, and Dr. Griffiths from MIT, and being able to have you guys even encouraging me in the back of my ear, like, hey, you can do this. I'm right here if you need me, but you can do this. Because there were some days when we adopted this program that I thought, ooh, I don't know. I don't know if we're going to do anything. But being able to move forward as a staff and as a community committed to doing this was really important. The other thing that I kept encouraging, even at my parents when they would have questions about it, was reminding them that I'm not worried about my first or third graders getting a patent. That's not what I'm going for this year, although awesome. And man, if that ever happens, and Clara, I hope you are, celebrating your success all over the place with patents. That's not my goal right now. Really setting reasonable goals for what we wanted to accomplish as a school community right away was really important. And then being able to say, my students are solving a real world problem. They're not inventing DNA, blah, 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 something that could make people feel it's a little heady or too much for people to understand. Because then we do have really amazing inventions where they worked through the whole process, they understood and got hands-on and like great vocabulary that even now around the school, I'll hear kids on the playground being like, well, my theory on da 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 da, or we should reiterate that. And I'm like, yes, you should reiterate your fairy house. Like, that's great, but that the invention vocabulary is becoming a normal part of their world. And so like Clara and David were talking about, it's not pulled out, it's inclusive of all that they're learning, even in the being able to reflect and write on the process. I mean, there, vocabulary, writing, inventing, community building. What a cool school to go to, right? Like, that's what you want to be a part of. And so as an administrator, being able to encourage my teachers in that, and I think for a lot of administrators, it can feel a little intimidating. There's a lot of other things that you're managing and trying to figure out. But the more you can continue to think, okay, what is my true goal here? And hopefully it's building trust in your community. Invention education is like an awesome win in my book for that.
Yeah, that's great. I never really thought about that aspect of it, the trust and building that community within the school. And that's so important right now, since so many of our teachers and students have been out of school. There's been that lack of community, and we're reaching out virtually. And so Invention education would be a really powerful tool to use right now as our students and teachers are entering, going back into the classroom, and the community members are there. And yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Well, and I was just going to say, I would speak a little bit more to that too, because we had fully remote students and in-person students in this process. And so that's challenging across the board. But it's something that's very accessible to do at home, and actually involved parents and got them passionate about it too. And again, it wasn't come up with these formulas. And obviously for, older kids, as they get older, that makes a lot of sense for them to do that. But for our elementary age kids, it was like Pashka just said, umbrella boots, or, chair tipper over, anti-tipper overs, or, I don't know.
Which those are so practical, like people need those.
Exactly. So
people need those. Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those barriers, because it's important, especially if you're new to this and you're like, oh goodness, here comes another program I have to implement. And it's important to hear, yes, there are barriers, but they can be overcome. And we use our community, we use our parents, we use our teachers. And so that brings up my next question, because, oh goodness, as educators, have we had things come in and out of our classroom every year, a new initiative, every year it's something different. So I want to focus on the future of Invention education. And Darcy, I'd love for you to kick us off with this. What, in your opinion, does Invention education look like in the future? Because I sure hope it's not one of these passing fads, the many that we've had in education.
Yeah, I mean, and just to comment on some of the things that were said already, I love the, talking about the trust and how that's so important. And I think just with COVID, and from what I've heard from educators, is that, it's become so important for students to take ownership of their own learning, and to have, the parents there as well. But how can you do that without instilling some trust and having that confidence built in a student to say, oh, I can do this. So I think, COVID's done some really horrible things in terms of a lot. But I think it's also brought us all together as a community and we've really seen some great outcomes in terms of, you know, what we can do to change that. And so kind of jumping off that for, you know, moving forward and what the future looks like, I think it is just encouraging students to have more of that autonomy with where they're going with whatever, you know, form of inquiry they're going through. And I think, Christine, you and I talked about this before, but I think technology is just going to really begin to elevate everything that students are able to do, not just within their invention, but like we talked about with Lumi Labs, being able to not have a poster board that they're displaying for just the people within the room, but really providing a platform that they can be able to, you know, share globally. They can share across the country, across the world, all of these wonderful things that they're doing.
That's great. And that digital, I mean, I think that's something that we learned from this year, that the virtual aspect of this year and the digital resources of this year, we can bring that into the future of Invention education. It doesn't have to, we innovated, we don't have to go back to how everything was. We have the opportunity now to continue to innovate and use digital resources and virtual platforms so that our young inventors can be communicating from people all over the world. So great point with that. Shri, what do you think is our future in invention education?
I am very excited about the whole exploration of STEM curiosity and creativity that invention education offers, because you have that in math and reading and writing. So I think for invention education, it's that opportunity students get to be creative. And I have a quick story, but the very first cohort I had, when I had to call the families and said, your student was one of the students the school gave me, the mom said, are you sure my son was the one? Because he's given up on school. Are you sure you have the right name? And I said, yeah, I have this name here. And he was one of the students who won the California State Invention Convention last year. He is a brilliant engineer in the making. And for me, the future of invention education is the discovery of this student potential, those who are curious and are tinkerers. And that's one of the criteria. The one part that I don't get involved in my program is student selection. I let the school do it because I live in the community. And I say, give me your curious students. And it's not reflected by their grades. It is reflected by how they are asking questions and who, you know, when you put something in front of them, they're going to tinker with it. And I think the future of invention education is in its ability to discover these tinkerers and innovators, and that will help it propel forward. And going back to the points mentioned by Clara and Bree, I see it in opening up that access, and it has potential. You know, there are these tinkerers and innovators, and there is the access issue, and it can bridge the two. And the whole trust aspect that Bree said, I feel like this whole tinkering aspect is going to be the one that can bring about the trust in the community. I have an amazing principal like you, Bree, because of who I can do it. And I don't know if Brenda Payne, our California Invention Director, is listening, but you know, it's people who can trust community members like me and say, okay, go ahead, do it. And so
Oh, did she freeze on us? Okay, Shri, we will get you back, and thank you for that answer. And David, I'd like to hear from you about your thoughts about the future of invention education.
I'm very optimistic, but I do have the caution. I mean, I think I think Shri hit on it, and I threw out in the chat, and I love the way she phrased it. You know, give me your curious students. You know, give me your students who are there. Don't give me your students who have this predetermined success. You know, because all students have this. How do we actually build on that? And I think if we as educators remember that element, we're going to be in good shape. And I think if we can, you know, if we can build on that, as Shri was saying, I think we're in great shape. Because once we start seeing all that creativity coming out of these students, it's going to be hard to turn it back. It's a matter of allowing the students to form those, you know, mutual experiences to connect their content to what they need to learn. And then we're going to see the gains that are just going to grow from that. And it's going to increase the equity. It's going to increase across the board. And so we need to make sure that we have our leaders like Bree. We have our, community members and parents who are coming in and saying, I have this stuff and I'm not giving up on it like Sri. We need Clara in the classroom who is, just crazy creative and going to make everything work. We need a combination of all of it. And so, but I think we're on the track with that. Just having this convention, having InventEd, having the Chicago Student Invention Convention, just having all of these networks coming together, having all of the people that are on this, or watching this panel. I applaud them for they're watching a screen, full of us talking about invention. That's amazing. So it just goes to show, how so much can be done. So I'm very optimistic about the path we can move forward with this.
Great, thank you. Sri, we had lost you towards the end of, I don't know if you wanted to finish your story or what you were saying, or I don't know if you remember. That happens.
I'm so sorry. I don't know where you lost me because things look fine at my end. So I don't want to repeat myself, but I think David paraphrased everything so beautifully. The one shout out I want to give is to our principal, Mr. Matthew Burnham, and to Brenda Payne, because these two people trusted me. And that trust element that Bree said is so important. Yes, go ahead, do it. And they're there to support. They're there to probably give you resources, answer questions. And but then the trust is such a huge aspect of this whole program, trusting the whole ecosystem of evangelists. That's so important for the success of invention education in any community. So thank you to all of you who do what you do.
Great, thank you. You're right. It takes a village to raise these young inventors. It's parents, it is educators, it is administrators, it is people like Darcy, where you have these digital resources and you want them to get to the kids, and you want to help, and you want to train the teachers to be able to use these resources with their students. It truly does take a village to get these young inventors, get their ideas out and get them made and created. One final question before we start to take some from the audience. I see that you have been dropping some questions for us in the chat. Thank you, everyone. With invention education, and rightfully so, we always talk about the students and how the successes of the students and how this has changed our students. And we absolutely should be celebrating that. But what I noticed when I became an invention education teacher, I changed. I became an inventor. I became an innovator. I started to identify problems and work towards solutions, and not be afraid to fail and try something and fail quick and adjust and pivot. So I really want to hear from our panel, how has invention education changed you as an educator? And I think I'll start with you, Clara.
So I did start my teaching career already understanding some aspects of invention education, but through my professional development and presenting and working with students, I have learned a lot. One of my pivotal moments as a teacher, though, came from I had my students doing an open-ended project, and we were looking at real-world issues in our local community, and I asked my students to develop we were rapid, we were doing rapid ideation and rapid prototyping and all that stuff. So one of my students was just in the corner, just frustrated. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, how do I approach this? Because depending on how I go about this, I could either kill her spirit or that, her, the way she approaches problems from now on, or I can get her to shift her mindset and go for it. And so I get over there and I ask her what's going on. And she just looks at me. She goes, I'm way too institutionalized for this. And I was like, whoa. So the past 10 years that she was in education, she was being institutionalized. There was a set curriculum. You followed the rules. You prepared for a test. You took your test. You passed. You moved on. But she never had the opportunity to look at what was going on in her community and approach it. And she didn't have the tools to do it. And here was this mean lady expected her to just jump into this and solve this problem. And so from there, I realized, okay, I can't just ask kids just to jump into something. We have to show them the problem, show them how it relates to them, ask them to observe their own lives, and then give them tools, the gradual release process with tools and ideas, and then break apart that institutionalized shell that they've been building so they can be this model student that's prepared to go to college, that's going to be a straight line engineer or a doctor or lawyer. And then that also made me realize, I took a little zoom into the future, and I realized that what's going on with them and what the job market or what society is going to look like when their generation is out of college is not going to look anything like what we're used to right now. So in some ways, I'm not even equipped to give them advice on what to do in the future because they're more knowledgeable on what the future is going to look like. All I know is the future is wildly creative, and we have to prepare them to solve these problems and to go on, and no matter what field they're in, to approach these problems. And I saw critical thinking in the chat. With critical thinking, we mentioned cultural awareness earlier on. Take that from that cultural awareness, and then that problem-solving mindset. And all of this is embedded in Invention education. But as I go through and I teach these concepts, and I meet new students from all backgrounds, and they bring their ideas, every time I have another encounter with a student, I change. I'm like a skill thief. I watch what they do and I'm like, oh, that was so cool. I have to tell other students about this. So I'm growing and learning as they're growing and learning as well, because a lot of it I just don't know. So we're all solving this problem together. So that completely shifted my approach and how I see teaching. And I definitely don't take the sage on a stage approach because I know that I don't know a lot of what's going on. So that's how it's changed me.
That's great. This is what we need to hear. We need to hear educators who don't know much about Invention education. Yes, we need to hear the student successes, but we also need to hear how it is impacting and changing our educators for the better. Shri, do you have any thoughts on that? How did it change you when you got involved in this?
The one question I've always wondered is, what is my place in this? Because I am not a school teacher and I'm doing this outside of school, but within the school system. Yep. So, and I finally had this epiphany this year is the teachers are like the parents for a child. And I am like this aunt or uncle who visits you, someone who's nice to have, and there is this need to have, and this, so that's kind of the epiphany I had, and I've been capitalizing on that, and both for learning purposes, to understand emotionally what is it doing to a student, because we've had a student lose an uncle on the very first day of class of the program, and we have had students who, this has been a hard year for the whole community around the world, and so what is it doing to a student? What is the whole Invention education helping them both heal and empower, and paying attention to that and using that and reflecting on it in my own practice is where I am changing. And just as a side note, every time if there's a small roadblock, I tell myself, what would an innovator do? Because if I'm teaching them innovation, I need to innovate. I had this massive, I had to be on the other side of the world for a family medical emergency and a massive Zoom failure just before my class had to start. And I was like, oh my God, what would an innovator do? And I called my husband on WhatsApp, which is a free call. And I said, can you have our son, who's a teenage, like high schooler, put the phone near a laptop and start the Zoom, and I talk on the phone, and he can comb through the chat and tell me what the students are telling. And it was scamper. It was literally the scamper activity, and I had to scamper right then. And that's how it's changing me, without like, oh my God, I have a Zoom failure, to like, how can I scamper through this? And for me, that's where it's affecting and changing me.
I love it. Okay, so we did say that we would take some questions from the audience. So I am looking through some great ones. And Sri, you were just mentioning how you had to scamper and you had to think like an innovator when things weren't going the way you wanted. And this kind of brings a question from the audience that, Bree, I think I'm going to ask you first. How would you recommend convincing a school district that has a ton of other programming but doesn't have Invention education to get on board? So Bree, we came to you with that. And how would you recommend that parents and program leaders go to schools with this information?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually, in a conversation Shri and I had a couple of weeks ago, she said something about like, and even your program, you know, I started with 10 students. And I think there's something really, really smart. Sometimes you'll meet a crazy administrator who says, sure, let's do it. They're like me, but sometimes you won't, and that's okay. People have a lot on their plate, and it doesn't make those people who say no to something grand wrong or bad. It just means you got to figure out what's the way in, what's that toe, right? And so if it means, hey, can I have 10 students this year and 20 the next year and 30 the next year, you know, it's building and scaffolding your program appropriately. Even when it comes, you know, I've been seeing a lot of comments about like parent involvement and what do you do when you have 2 parents that work full time? How do you get them involved? Well, I think, you know, there's other options even for students. You can present the material in class, you can work through the innovation process. That doesn't mean each student has to go on to state invention convention. Just getting this education in some form is helpful to really, I think, encourage people. I saw the comment too, like fail forward. Like that's what we want to do, right? Even if there's one way that invention education has changed me as an administrator is I'm really okay if some of my teachers come to me and say, hey, I didn't do this perfectly. I'm like, great. How are we going to do it better next year, right? That's okay. If I'm expecting perfection from anybody right away, that's not going to be a fun environment to be in. And so I think when we're talking to parents or teachers who want to bring this to a larger group, think, what are they going to say yes to? Not how am I going to, you know, convince them that this has to happen. And so I think, I don't know, that's really important to set your scale appropriately when you're moving forward in this.
Yeah, great point. And another audience question before we get to my favorite question of the day in our close. Gosh, we could be here all day talking about this. I think next time we book a whole day or afternoon to talk. Darcy, since you've dealt with so many teachers with your resources, what would you say, well, how would you say you've seen invention education implemented? An audience member was asking, should it be its own endeavor? Can it be mixed into the current curricula that they have at a school? With all the teachers you've dealt with, have you seen a trend in that?
You know, I think that especially what we're hearing today, that it really is cross-curricular and it really should be cross-curricular. I think that that gives the opportunity for all students to participate as well, and provide that equitable scope across, you know, the school and the district that you're working with too. So, I mean, and you can do that with obviously the Britannica resources, but being able to you know, have the content and the resources to be able to support that is really important too.
Yep, very good point. So this brings us to our close. I hope we don't just get booted out of here at 2:15 or 1:15 or wherever you are in the world. So I will start by saying thank you to everyone for joining us Again, we know, especially our educators out there, Saturdays are so precious and special, and we appreciate you being here with us to either learn about Invention education for the first time or to explore new thoughts or resources about it if you're a veteran teacher. And we just wanted to end with kind of a fun question. So panelists, what is your favorite student invention? What problem did it solve? How did it solve it? And hopefully we won't get kicked out at 2:15, but if we do, and you're in mid-sentence. So I'll start with, how about the reverse of our introduction? So Shri, what is your favorite student invention that you've seen?
It's the bamboo scooter that was invented by our students last year, because it solves both accumulation of metal debris in the landfill, and it has potential to help with both rural and urban mobility. And I learned how stronger bamboo is comparison to steel from my students. So that's why I love it. I love it at all these levels.
That's great. Bree, how about you? I know you were your own students. Oh my goodness, they were blowing me away.
Well, this is a very appropriate first grade invention. We had a sweet student who his problem was that his brother was coming in and ruining his toys and his builds. And so he was going to create, and he did invent sort of a brother detector. And so it tripped. And when it tripped, though, this is the best part of this invention. Instead of, you know, a net coming out and capturing his brother or something like that, the sensors trip and a disco ball falls down. And so his brother can start dancing and get distracted by the disco ball and leave. So it was a very sweet, peace-filled, sibling encouraging relationship invention. So.
That might work on me too. If I saw a disco ball with music, I might get into it as well. So I like where he was going with that. Thank you for sharing that with us. It is great. Darcy.
I try to hook something up like that for my 3-year-old daughter to get. I love that. Well, you know, I was involved in the Invention Convention last year and was able to be a judge. And I was looking back at some of the videos that the students made through Lumi Labs. And I think one of my favorites, and it's just because he was so passionate about it, as a student created the vac eraser. And so it was a real world problem. Every time he erased, there was smudging, and there were, you know, the flakes of the eraser. So having the vacuum and being able to suck up all of his eraser shavings was definitely would solve one of my problems that I have. And he was so passionate about it, he sold me on it.
Again, so practical. I would buy that as well. Like our youth have the answers to most of our problems. Listen to them and let them build and design. Clara, what about you?
So I'm very biased on this, but
you can be.
I saw some great things today as well as discussions within the judging circles. Judge circle number 9, very impressive discussion happening in there. But my favorite student invention has to be the mosquito agitator that my students created, just because of the potential of saving so many lives around the world, and the fact that they worked so hard to accomplish this, getting this patented and creating the prototype itself. So I'm very biased, but I think that it has the potential to save many people. So.
No, that's great. Nothing biased about that. David, what about you?
Well, I like the way Darcy said, you know, and you could see it in Bree's, and, you know, and everyone's answer, you know, it's the passion behind it. And so that sort of fuels mine. It's hard to walk into a younger elementary classroom and not just see the huge passion behind this. And so this is one that's actually a few years older, but it's still one that I just always brings up in my mind with this question. And it was a first grade class, and it was around Halloween, and in science, they're studying light and shadows and everything. And of course, they wanted to come up, they had a PBL unit around coming up with safety for Halloween. And one of the groups, a lot of them they were just putting glitter and things and glow lights and sticking them to t-shirts, and they were all really cool and they were great. And some had songs and you name it. But this one group, and I was talking to them and they said, well, we're not just hard to see because it's dark. We're hard to see because we're short and we're small. So, so how do we solve this problem? So we figured out we've got to make ourselves bigger. And so they created these balloons that would actually go up. And so the balloons were up now 10 feet. So now they said, so now we're big, we light up, they can see us, and they had sounds attached to it. So they said, so people can hear us. And so it was a whole little presentation, and it was all coming from this little first grade group of students that were, I was ready to take my wallet out right there. It was just, they were phenomenal. And it was the passion behind the way they described all of the learning, all of the thinking, all of the strategies. It just really connected, and it showed, and the teacher did a wonderful job growing through this unit as well. So it was just kind of a connection of the whole thing, that the teacher, really saw the kids glow and grow from it. So it was wonderful.
That's great. I love that idea.
Yeah.
I would say my favorite invention, I met an inventor 4 years ago, and she was trying to reinvent masks. This is 4 years ago. No one was wearing masks, but she noticed that her grandmother had to wear a mask in the nursing home, but she was afraid to because of the stigma around masks. So this was 4 years ago, pre-COVID. She was designing masks that were fashionable and protective. And oh my gosh, it just gives me chills, because again, we weren't thinking like that back then. And she was a 6th grader at the time. That was her problem. That was her focus in helping her grandmother. And now look where we are today. And speaking of today, thank you to our panelists for joining us and spending your time and just giving us so much for our inspiration buckets and our innovative mindset or invention mindsets. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and keeping it real with those barriers and how you rose above those, and for hitting on things like trust in the community of the school and listening to our youth. They have the solutions to our problems, and bringing in culture and being hands-on and minds-on, and resources that we can use. Thank you to the panelists for being here, and thank you to everyone who watched us and even stayed on a little bit later with us. Now you can go out and enjoy your Saturday, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Wonderful.